Our heart goes to the family of Ayo Adams. He was such a great sports analyst and presenter on The Weekend Show. You're not watching the lifestyle segment on The Weekend Show, brought to you by Holocron Popcorn. Today's episode is supported by Worthy. We talk about women's economic empowerment. We talk about women's empowerment. March was International Women's Month. But did you know that in order to be able to achieve women's economic empowerment, sexual and reproductive health rights plays a crucial role? Because this affects productivity, this affects availability to education and to even to the market space, the health space, and whatever industries which they work in. I remember a Nigerian footballer making history goalkeeper, being the first athlete who was pregnant as a goalkeeper during an international tournament. We keep on breaking barriers and breaking boundaries, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And having a conversation today around sexual and reproductive health right, we are joined virtually by Fulu Storms, who is a lawyer, broadcaster, and media executive. And also we have Miriam Booker, who is an award-winning poet and co-author of Peace Begins With Me. Also joining us, we have Dr. Uchenna Ibokwe, who is the Executive Director, CEO of Solina Center for International Development and Research. Good morning and welcome to the show, Folu and Miriam. Good to see you again, Folu.
Hello, Andy. Good morning. It's fantastic to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Hello, Miriam.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me.
I've followed your work and I think you're absolutely amazing.
Thank you so much.
And Dr. Uchenna, thanks for all the work which you do. Let me start with our ladies here. Let's start with you, Fulu. We just had the International Women's Month, and for as a Nigerian, I want to believe that was quite a chaotic month. With all the progress which we think we've achieved and we've had, it did take us back a little bit. One thing I know about you is you align really closely to sexual and reproductive health, right? Why is this important to you, Follow Storms?
Well, it's particularly important to me because I'm a big champion for women's agency, our economic empowerment, and our sexual health and reproductive rights align very closely with that. In Nigeria, we have a lot of issues dealing with sexual and reproductive health. They stem from the the systemic the systemic approach to how we view women. Culture gets involved in that a little bit. Religion gets involved in that a little bit. But we have one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world. We have a big issue with adolescent girls and underage girls with pregnancy. We have a big issue with stigma around discussing things around females' health and female sexual health and reproductive rights. And all of this is a big problem. If a woman doesn't have control of her body, if she doesn't have agency when it comes to her own health, how is she expected to be empowered? And the reason women empowerment is so important is because women empowerment is the foundation of economic empowerment.
Something interesting which Full spoke about is autonomy and also the fact that we don't even have some of these conversations. And in some cases, it's because of religion or it's because of some type of stigma around having certain conversations. Miriam, being a Nigerian, and we've also seen how there are a lot, the mortality rate and women dying as a result of complications during childbirth and even just lack of access to health care has affected a lot of African and Nigerian women. Why is this conversation important, Miriam?
Um, Thank you very much for that question. I think that this conversation is really important because as women, I think that both our mothers and our daughters, and even we ourselves, we have sort of learned to demonize things like contraception. Some conversations around like menstruation, they're still actually laced with like taboo. And you find situations where consent becomes like a topic that is in hush notes and like not in classrooms, and like services, even where they're available, they're often inaccessible, like due to cost, distance, stigma. or policy barriers. So I believe that it is important to create awareness about this, because without the awareness, then we cannot really see the progression that we want, and sensitization of its importance in itself, because women empowerment in itself really begins when a woman can take agency with dignity, and has autonomy over her own body, and she realizes that it's not a battleground, but it's actually a birthplace for power. So that's why I believe it's important.
I agree with you totally. For something which I struggle with is the fact that while we try to have these conversations, especially in the media space and talking about awareness, sexual and reproductive health rights, it's not one of those fun conversations. It's not one of those things that you do and you get everybody's attention and they're having conversations about it. We've had champions like yourself and a couple of champions from Worthy who have constantly been having this conversation. There are people like you, there are people like Adesua, people like Inedima, and we see the attention these conversations have, but there's still, I don't know if the word is stigma, but there's the fact that we still shy away from having these conversations in the public space and in media. What do you think is the reason for this, and how can we make this a conversation that people must have?
Well, Andy, I think this is something that has just become a part of Nigerian culture, which is a little problematic. Well, when we use the term culture, it's just a way of thinking and being that over years we've accepted and we've normalized. I think a very good way to approach this is through media. It's part of why people like Adesu and myself, Ini, we use our platforms. I'll give you a very recent example. There's a phenomenal television show that I'm involved in. It's called Baby Farm, and it's out on Netflix at the moment, and that deals very specifically with the issue of women and adolescents, almost young women being used as baby factories. That's a way to ignite conversations around sexual reproductive health. That's a way to ignite conversations about how the continued stigmatization of women being pregnant or women engaging in premarital activities, how it can drive them into very dangerous situations. So yes, that issue is there because we have allowed it to be there. But as long as people like you lend your platforms to have these conversations, people like us, Miriam, we continue to weave this into the fabric of entertainment and use entertainment to educate people, I think it does slowly but surely help to change our perception, because nobody wants to be lectured to. Nobody likes a lecture, but people do enjoy being entertained. We're a country of people that we love a good story. And once you can frame the story in a way that is relatable to people, they begin to say, oh, maybe in my life, I don't want this to happen to my family member. Because a lot of young women that end up in these dangerous situations, and a lot of people, period, never expected they would get there. Their families may not have known what happened to them. They ran away because they were afraid of what would be said in family homes. So to any parents out there, to family members out there, please do not stigmatize talking about something that is a natural part of life. It is better that we talk about it and we protect people going forward. So that's what I would say.
You know, I agree with you, and Baby Farm is actually on my watch list for this weekend because I want to actually, you know, the one that you chill, you get a cold bottle of something, and you get ready to watch,
Mm.
and it's been right in front of me, and that's actually on my list. And I like that you brought that up because there are a lot of messages we can pass through TV, through movies, through shows. I remember how educative Oloture, for instance, was. I remember documentaries by, was it Beverly on hair and talking about African hair. And it's the same thing with Baby Farm, talking
Skin.
about all these little bits without educating or lecturing people directly because like you said, nobody wants to lecture. I've been to some of these conferences and workshops where they're literally speaking to grown-ups there like they're 5 years old, and there's almost a hint of condescension, which now loses the attention of everybody in the room because it's like, what are you trying to say? And so being able to create ways around spreading awareness in a format that is a bit more engaging plays a huge, huge role. I see Miriam smiling. One of the biggest parts of these conversations, we tie it to education, education, education. And most times as Nigerians, when we hear education, we think school. But we've spoken about media, but you've also got the religious institution, the traditional institution, because what I worry about is the fact that even in education, where do we start? You have the children, you have the adolescents, and then you have the older generation, the adults, who are very disconnected from these conversations. How do we tie in education across boards to be able to spread this awareness?
Well, if you would like me to address that, I would say this is where also sort of funding comes into it. That while some of the conferences can seem a little bit boring, the truth is for you to diversify the type of education you're giving people and diversify the type of education you're giving adults, you need to mobilize people to do that. That's where organizations like SKIDA come in as well. You know, there are people who are actively out there entering communities, doing the groundwork, but you have to go into the communities, especially where this is prevalent. It's one thing for us to sit on a lovely television show and talk about it and speak in very highfalutin terms, but education must be tuned to the audience that you want to reach. And it must again be creative, it must be innovative, and it must be realistic. You have to speak very clearly in terms that people understand at the level you want them to understand. It must be translated to multiple languages. We have so many languages in this country. But again, that really comes with funding, and it comes with creating awareness to the general public. It comes with creating awareness for the high net worth individuals, the companies. We have a lot of companies in Nigeria have CSR goals and CSR targets, but sometimes they forget this crucial aspect of life. And at the end of the day, when we talk about sexual and reproductive health of women, that is the foundation for any society. We don't have a community without a woman giving birth to that community. So I think when we look at how to educate people, we need funding. That's really important. A lot of this funding that happens in the sexual and reproductive health area, it comes very heavily from international bodies. And as we see what's happening on a global level, with America moving the way that it is, the world being affected, a lot of that funding might be shutting down. Nobody's coming to save us. We have to save ourselves. So that's what I would lend to that.
No one is coming to save us. Miriam, what other methods and ways do you think we can help, one, boost funding in this sector locally, and also how can we tie in our creative spaces like with what you're doing to spread the message and the awareness around this topic, Miriam?
Thank you very much for that question. I think when we talk about like local funding for this, first of all, for people to even sort of believe in the cause, we have to sort of find a way to operate within their cultural context. And Ms. Storms rightly mentioned, we have to look at the context of language, because language also breeds access. And if you want people to contribute on that grassroots level, or to sort of galvanize that sympathy or empathy towards funding such a program or such a mission, then definitely it has to be within, like, you have to also put in context their own cultural way of life. And again, really utilizing storytelling. And one of the ways that I feel like we can really tie in creativity, I would talk from a perspective of my work, which is using poetry to humanize those terms, is really in terms of using the local languages, and also being sensitive to their own cultural bias, and then maybe tapping into the stories that they believe in and repurposing that to sort of pass that message to them. And again, poetry has been there from time immemorial, and every culture relates to poetry in a certain way. And that is also why with what I'm doing now, I'm engaging people in their own languages to be able to take the message to the grassroots, which I find to be more potent, because regardless of how much I can go ahead and speak English and talk about this, it is also great to sort of pass that kind of wisdom or like art to other people that really are also affected, so that they're also able to tell their own story.
You know, Miriam, when I hear you talk, I love the fact that you and Fulu have mentioned being able to understand the cultural context. It's quite almost ridiculous when you find some of these things being expressed in a way that doesn't relate anti to us as a people, and by that I mean by Africans and Nigerians, and sometimes even in our religious spaces. Well, I can't imagine that this journey has been easy for you as a person, as an individual. Tell us about the barriers you've had to face, the challenges, and the pushback you get to deal with while doing what you do.
I think first sometimes there is disbelief, like, especially when like you're supporting organizations to like design campaigns and like they have their own idea. And again, because of a lot of the ways that these organizations have been functioning in Nigeria, they kind of like come with their own solutions as opposed to like co-creating. And then when you sort of like bring up the idea that, okay, you know what, how about we empower these people to actually use their own voices to write their own story. I get it. It's great for me to also champion a cause, but it's not a thing that can be dealt with in isolation. So when sort of I talk about this kind of ideas in those spaces, sometimes I get that pushback because I think there's always this feel like we know what is better, we know what is better. But again, language in itself, like I say, is access, and people love things that they're familiar with. And so if I cannot speak that language, then it is okay for us to actually train other people. But like, yeah, I do face that kind of pushback where sometimes I'm either like dismissed or yeah, not engaged again. But that doesn't kind of like stop me from doing what I do. And now we're seeing like more acceptance, and I'm so excited about it.
Thank you so much. I don't know if we've got Dr. Uchenna still with us, because it's important to understand why the Solina Center has also been focusing on this, especially in underserved communities. Do we have Dr. Uchenna with us? Okay, please tell us about why this is an area of interest for your organization, sir.
Yeah, good morning and thanks for having me. I think it's great to start by saying it's really inspiring hearing Miriam and Folu speak. They are not healthcare professionals. I'm a doctor. I started my career out as a medical professional before joining Solina and doing some of this work in public health. But it's good to see that everyday Nigerians are passionate about these topics, are so knowledgeable about these topics. And I think that in itself is a very, very good point in terms of helping us get access. So why do we care? I'm sure you must have seen sobering statistics that relate to sexual reproductive health. One that is out there, and I saw some good media around, is likening it to a whole airplane of women dying every day in Nigeria alone from childbirth and childbirth-related causes. I think this is definitely very alarming. No woman has to die while trying to give life, to another human being. So that begs the question of why. I think that in itself is part of why we care. I think, and if you dig a little bit further into the information, you find that only 14% of women have access to modern contraceptives. You have many, many women that want this access, not having it. So, of course, when you have an unwanted pregnancy, sometimes in women that are too young to have a baby, are not ready or prepared to have a baby, then of course you end up with such causes. So again, we need to look at it from a more holistic perspective, just as Fulu and Mariam had mentioned. I think it's also important to flag that the discussions are not just social, but economic as well, right? Because you have 70% of our healthcare costs in Nigeria being paid for out of pocket. So that then means that if you need to get care for a woman that's pregnant and you need to access health services, if there's a complication, you need to access a cesarean section. You see how that leads to issues. You must have seen some information out in social media recently of a man in Lagos who was live streaming actually while holding his wife who had a complicated obstructed labor. and we ended up losing that woman. So these are not just stories, these are real people. So why do we care? I think in Solina, we use the tools that we have, which is really our ability to analyze the systems, to design programs, and to support the government, but also civil society organization and development partners to implement them. So in recent time, just a few examples of how we do that is we've supported the government of Nigeria with an assessment to think about what's the access for sexual reproductive health services in Nigeria. And we looked at over 20,000 primary healthcare centers. The results were not surprising to me because you found that only 30% on the average of all of them delivered what we call the full suite of sexual reproductive health services. So this includes maternal health services, but also includes things like family planning services, adolescent health services, but also like gender-based violence and some of those services. So that calls for a lot of investment. I think it's not all doom and gloom though, because I think the government of Nigeria currently, the Federal Ministry of Health, I think has its head in the right place. Because I think there's been recent assessments and announcements, by the government, which is being backed up by investments to really expand that access. There has been discussions about upgrading our primary healthcare centers to make sure that the infrastructure is done right, which is critical, but also to make sure the human resources are there. As you know, there's the Japa syndrome in Nigeria. This shouldn't be new to any of us, where our doctors, our nurses are moving out in droves to other clients where they can make better economic gains to advance their careers. So again, this calls for a lot of investment to be able to make sure those services are there. But at the same time, as I had mentioned, the financial system, the financial risk is also a big issue. So expanding a health insurance, which is very, very critical, is also important to make sure that even when folks get to the facilities, they are then able to afford the care that they need. So thanks. I think these are some of the ways in which we attack the issue. But as I said, Fulu and Mariam are really inspiring to show that even those that are not public health professionals really understand these issues and advocating for them.
Thank you, Dr. Uchena. It's sad about the man who live streamed his wife's condition and how that ended. It was even more disheartening to see the conversations on social media about people trying to blame everybody from the man to the late wife to the healthcare sector. And we do a lot of blame game. However, and this may be me being hypocritical because I want to do a bit of blame gaming for the medical sector. Um, Access to contraceptives, access to health care, access to testing, in some cases are now being provided. We now have some centers and places. But stigma, the human nature. Some of our champions here want to be able to walk into a medical facility and get some tests done, some checks done. But I've literally been into some hospital for some reason, and another person had called me 2 days later saying, oh, someone said they saw you at this place. We have the TikTok generation where you're seeing your doctors and your physiotherapists dancing on TikTok. And these are people you're meant to trust with your private records and your health. And so one of the reasons why a lot of people, even the educated, do not access the healthcare even when they have the resources is because of the stigma and in most cases the lack of data protection in those spaces. How can the healthcare sector improve their practices in a way that it builds confidence of the people to be able to walk in and get tested, get support and checks without being stigmatized or without being fingers being pointed at them in the public tomorrow?
No, you ask excellent question. You ask an excellent question because I think when we talk about access to healthcare and to services, one point which we've tackled in my prior statement is around making sure the healthcare workers are there, the structures are there, and you're able to deliver the care. The second one is from a demand side, from the client themselves. They need to feel comfortable receiving that care. They need to understand that their confidentiality will not be breached. They need to understand that they will not be stigmatized. Unfortunately, this is not the case all of the time. And there are a few reasons, I think, why. One is our health facilities first need to be structured in a way where you can actually get care in a way that makes sure you're not exposed. The rooms themselves, how are they structured? Are you able to have privacy to discuss with the physician, with the nurse or midwife? Are the clinicians or healthcare professionals there trained to be able to administer care without stigmatizing? Adolescent health is an important point. How does a young girl who's just become pregnant feel free walking in? The mannerism, the approach in which the healthcare professional engages that youth might be what might drive them away from the facility. And as we see in many instances in Nigeria, drive them into the hand of quacks, where we see over 60% of abortions being performed clandestinely, and of course, leading to many complications and death. So there's things around the structures, but there's also things around just the training, around the delivery of care. I think important to then note that even when these are provided, there's then the whole community approach, the thinking about the advocacy of itself, like Miriam and Fulu already mentioned. Everyone in community needs to understand that this should not be stigmatized. That education should start, and should start early as well, because what we find is that young girls already fall into this problem before they are ever educated about it. So if you think about working with the education sector as well, having clubs in our schools where these things are already discussed, that then helps prepare young girls for a better future with their reproductive health and prevents a lot of these complications and also the stigma, which we see that causes a lot of issues.
Thank you very much. Just as we round up, I'm going to go around from Folu to Miriam and then you, Dr. Ochina. This is the time where we ask for your wish list. And so what's your ask? Folu, how can people support what you as a champion, what you do? I mean, funding is number one. I'll say people should support Folu, fund her projects, listen to what she's saying, but I'll give that to you. What's your ask to the public, to organizations, to the government as we wrap up this conversation?
Honestly, my ask to the general public is just to please create environments where anyone in your immediate circle can have these sorts of conversations with you. Educate yourselves as much as possible. Read up on, there's material everywhere, it's online. But I think most importantly is create environments where people can have those conversations. To organizations, you know I'm gonna go to money, bro, because money makes the world go round.
It does.
Fund, fund, fund. I will also go as far as to say again, there's nothing stopping you from setting up pro bono spaces within your organizations where people can go to again to be sponsored, to get education, to get training, things like that. And to the federal government is really our primary healthcare workers. They're the backbone of every community and every society. We must do more to make sure that when they're supposed to be paid, they are paid on time. We must do more to keep up with training, to keep up with the latest information, with sensitization. I think that's incredibly important. So those are my asks, honestly, that people just create enabling environments in any way that they can to make sure that these conversations continue and it drives real action.
Thank you, Fulu. And for our viewers, please go on Netflix and watch Baby Farm and check out the beautiful work by Fulu. Miriam, what's your ask? What's on your wish list for how you think you can and should be supported with this?
My ask is that the politicians shaping policies and also like the public shaping culture, they should stop using the woman's body as battlegrounds for their own beliefs. And my wish is that every woman, every girl would actually stop bleeding in silence and understand that storytelling is resistance, and she should be able to claim her narrative. I wish that she's able to find the confidence enough to claim her confidence, like to claim her story. I always say this. I know that there's an issue of shame when it comes to these things, but like I and my friends, we like jokingly say things like, people hide their skeletons in the closet, but I bury mine with the earth so that they become one. So if you're able to like own your own shame, nobody can shame you. And how people can support is that there should be artists, young storytellers as well. They should be comfortable using their own language in advocating for these issues or mixing it with English. I'm also trying my best to learn other languages because language is also access. So, yes,
Thank
that is
you.
my ask and my wish
Thank you
list.
so much, Miriam. And I think it's really important what you do. And I always have this conversation with my colleagues in the media space that the little bit which we think we're doing, that's writing history for the next generation because this is all they will have. For the likes of Fulu, some of us, we watched people like Cyril Stoba, Eugenia Abo on TV, and we were like, oh, this is something you may be interested in. And now there's a generation of people watching you and saying, this is who I want to be and what I want to be. And so, as much as I say nobody asks to be a role model, by doing what you do, Miriam, with poetry, you are creating history for the next generation because we see the difference in opinions when it comes to news and media these days. And I recall someone saying, if we have this now, imagine how much was wiped away and out of history. And so it's extremely important that we do what we're doing now and document it. Dr. Ochena, I'll start your wish list for you by telling you that policies, 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 and implementation. We have a policy for everything in this country. Implementation becomes a big problem. And so we want to encourage you to continue supporting our partners and our champions, but also pushing with policy advocacy because the more we have these conversations, the more people in power know that this is important for us. And we'll force them to know because we'll keep on having these conversations. But what else is on your wish list and how your organization can be supported?
Yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. On my wish list, I would say that we should all be advocates for better quality of health services. I think you're only going to get better quality of health services if you demand it. So I think for everybody out there, when you walk into a primary health care center, when you walk into a hospital, demand good quality health care. When you see somebody not being serving right, speak up because I think as collective advocates, we can achieve much better results. I think we also need to, in all our roles as parents, as teachers, as artists, we should all know that sexual reproductive health is our business. I think it affects our community, affects the whole of society. So everyone should take it very seriously. And as you said rightly, we need to translate policy to actual implementation and practice. That takes resources. So we should advocate not just for funds, but exactly how are the funds spent? How do we make sure that translates to better PHCs, translates to better availability of healthcare workers to deliver these services? At CEDA, this is what we do. This is what we live and breathe. Sexual and reproductive health is not just a privilege. I think it's a right. And there's also an economic argument because when you tackle it well, then women are more productive, women live longer lives. That affects the whole society. So I think everyone should invest boldly around this and we won't just be saving lives, we'll be unlocking big, big potentials for Nigeria overall.
Thank you so much, Miriam Buka, Fulu Storms, and Dr. Uchenna. Always a pleasure having conversations with you, and thank you for the work which you do. It's been a pleasure having this conversation.
Thank you for having us.
You're
You.
Bye.
welcome. That's the
Thank
much we
you.
can take on the lifestyle segment, but coming up shortly, we will be talking about compliance and implementation, legislative compliance with Senator Garba Maidoki on the political segment. But we do have other exciting segments for you, so don't go away. See you after this break.